has lectured outside of NYU at music conferences everywhere. This past year, Judy was the lead instructor on the American Music Mentorship Program for the Recording Academy and the United States State Department. Let's continue that program. Let's hope that that program continues. Judy, as much as anyone I have ever known, believes in the power of music to change the world, which is the topic of this panel. Please welcome my colleague Judy Tent and her panel.
Hello again. Everybody still good? Okay. Well, as you'll see, the title of this panel is Where the Action Is, Music for Social Change, which is a topic very near and dear to my heart. So I'm incredibly happy and thrilled and honored, all the things, to have these amazing humans with me today. Sarita Thompson and Rich Pagano and Taylor Hanson, who made it in by the skin of his teeth. Thank you to the airlines and the travel gods that he was not in the DC airport, which we thought might be happening. Unfortunately, Greg Williamson had a work emergency and unavoidable conflict. He was really upset not to be able to join us. Hopefully he'll pop by later in the day, so shout out from Greg. As Larry said, I'm a big believer in the power of music. I often say I'm a hippie with a law degree, and it's really true. Ever since I was very young, I understood that music could bring people together, inspire people, motivate people, and really move the needle. And certainly these days, the needle needs some help being moved. So it was really important to me to have this conversation and talk about the different ways that music and musicians in our community can make a difference. Does anybody know up here the first organization to leverage the power of celebrity, believe it or not, was UNICEF way back in the 50s. Audrey Hepburn and Danny Kaye were the first celebrity goodwill ambassadors. These days, it seems like every celebrity has a cause, every cause has a celebrity. But there's a reason for that. It's because the light that shines on music and musicians can then be shared with the causes that are dear to their hearts. So rather than having me read their canned bios, I'm going to ask my wonderful speakers here to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll dive into it. So, Sarita, trumpet lady, look at her. I mean, come on, come on.
Well, my name is Sarita Thompson. Most people call me the trumpet lady. And I'll be honest, at first that was a name that was like, oh God, why do I have to be called the trumpet lady? But what happened was, I have a lot of different colored trumpets because most people ask me, well, how did you start playing the trumpet? Very simple. It was the loudest in the band. Very simple. And there were no other instruments to play. I couldn't afford to get all the different reeds. So the trumpet, you stick the mouthpiece in and you learn how to play. It was the loudest in the band. So I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised. It's Chi-Town in the house, and Chi-Town. My family is from New Orleans, Louisiana, so I come from a very rich culture of music. My dad, he was a music enthusiast, and he loved the music of Sarita Wright. And so that's how I inherited my name, Sarita. I was named after the great singer Sarita Wright, who was also a vocalist. And so I grew up playing, actually I started playing the trumpet in church before I took private lessons. And so, because my mother said, now listen, I'm not gonna keep buying you these instruments and you don't take these instruments to church. And so before I took to school, I had to play in church, so I learned how to play by ear before I had private lessons. So moving fast forward, I studied classical music. I studied with Mr. Vincent Chikowicz of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, which led me to, I studied with Alan Baptiste, which led me to study classical and jazz. So during that time, I moved my career fast forward for the sake of time. Moving forward, I came to New York. I'm actually an alumni of NYU. And so I came under the tutelage of Mr. Bill Fielder, who also taught Wynton Marsalis and Terrence Blanchard. I became the trumpet lady because I've always been the only female in the band. And I have a red trumpet, I have a black trumpet, and I'm the first and only of a Swarovski crystal trumpet, which has, as you can see here, 10,300 Swarovski crystals. But I always carry my trumpet with me is because I was always taught, you never know when it's gonna be time to play.
Gotta be ready.
So that's when I short bio. I have a bachelor's degree from Rutgers University, and I have my master's degree right here from NYU. I've had a couple of Billboard chart-topping records in gospel and in jazz and all the good kind of stuff.
There you go, trumpet lady. Well, it's funny, I sometimes say how tambourine will travel, and I'm rocking.
That's right.
I have actually played this on sessions on occasion. Rich Pagano, my friend.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rich Pagano, native New Yorker, and my life these days is, I guess, when I'm not in I live in New York City, but I also live upstate where I have my recording studio, and there I do a lot of mixing for people. I do a lot of producing, a lot of drum tracks, of course. It's so easy to work remotely now, of course, by sending files. I write music either with other people, or I'm sure we'll talk about this in a second. This is my new CD, if anyone still buys CDs, but of course it's everywhere. When I'm not either in my studio or touring, these days I tour with Betty LaVette, and when I'm not touring, I'm doing sessions here in the city. I'm also a certified sober coach and a parent liaison, and I'm sure we can talk a bit more about that in a minute. I also taught for 5 years at the Clive Davis Institute of Recording, part of NYU, and now I just do lectures there every year. But I'm glad to be here, and just a working musician who releases his own music, and is just happy to be in the music business and still sort of making a living.
I will say he's incredibly modest. He's a badass drummer. He plays pretty much I've seen him play all the things. He sings, he writes, he arranges, he produces. You're sort of the moving force behind the Fab Four, which is like, you want to tell them about the Fab Four?
Well, a bunch of session musicians 25 years ago decided that the Beatles weren't being represented correctly or authentically. We are a bunch of purists, and 5 of us set out to conquer what the Beatles, when they stopped touring, they were no longer able to, of course, realize their records. And so we employed a horn section and string section here in New York City, and we started performing everything from 68 on, which, you know, the bigger productions. And it just blew up, and it just became big in a bunch of cities. It's called the Fab Four. We don't do it very much anymore. We kind of semi-retired it. But I'm very proud of what Will Lee and Jimmy Vivino and Frank Agnello and Jack Petrozelli and I have created with that. If you go to thefabfour.com, you can know more about that. But for me, it's richpagano.com.
There you go. Thank you. And to my far left, I got to tell you, this is probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I ran into Taylor Hanson at a Grammy event in LA, and I'm not even sure how it started, but we started talking about tambourines, which is certainly a subject.
It never stopped, never will.
Yeah, pretty much. And we've been friends ever since, and he's here, ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Hanson.
I'm going to start introducing myself by saying I'm really grateful that I'm actually on this stage, because about 15 minutes ago I was in a cab and I was still running. But give it up for Judy, because she is a force of nature. We're going to talk about lots of things. I have no formal education in my life, but I have just been to NYU in Abu Dhabi. I'm here in NYU with you all, and there's an NYU campus where I'm from in Tulsa, so I feel like I'm connected to NYU in other ways. So my whole life has been music. I love the sort of call to action of this panel because it's about music being social change. I think the existence of music in and of itself is an act of social change. Right, I think it is in and of itself. And so I've lived music since I was a kid, like you started in church and then was sort of kicked out because I was singing rock and roll at 10 or whatever that is. And I think I first heard a song that a lot of people got to know me and my brothers through on the radio here in New York for the first time. When Bob first broke 25 years ago, a song called Bob that came out was our kind of introduction to a lot of people.
Handsome, I mean, come on.
But what I've found, and I love this conversation, is I have found that music is often a powerful force to communicate not just the heart, the soul of the music you want to share. And the artist's act of sharing is an act of social change, I think. Just like the Beatles did it, just like so many. But when we first bumped into each other and started talking tambourine, maybe I'll tell that story more. I was on a kind of a overwhelming wave of drive to tell people about a cause for the women of Iran, several years ago. And that song went on to win the first Song for Social Change Grammy ever. And I was preaching and sharing and saying the tragedy of all these women that are being imprisoned and just for not showing their hair and things like that. And so I think I've accidentally stumbled along the incredible power of how music brings people to causes, and great to be here.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Well, some of you may be familiar with a professor and historian named Heather Cox Richardson. She's been very vocal in the last couple of years. She has a blog, and she posts a lot online. Must have been about 2 months ago when I started seeing this reel that was shared to me by multiple people, and she talked about the fact that in order for fascism and authoritarianism to really thrive, to some degree it depends on an atmosphere of hopelessness and anger and bitterness and despair. And by extension, anything that we can do that is an act of joy and creativity and positivity is in and of itself an act of resistance. So, thank you, right? So that just sort of galvanized for me what I've always believed about music, and without getting overly political, I think we can all agree that these are very challenging times. There's a lot going on that feels different, that feels scary for various reasons. There's a lot of people that are hurting, so all the more reason why we need music. So just by making music, promoting music, helping somebody else's music be heard, or just by showing up here today, you are, in a way, committing your acts of positive resistance. So give it up for yourselves. Thank you very much.
I add something to that. So I don't want to get ahead of anything, but one reason why I'm here today is because of, we lost our son almost 4 years ago to this epidemic, which is fentanyl poisoning. And Nick was he was a triple threat. He was an actor, singer, dancer, but he suffered from depression and anxiety. And he was also gay. And he had a mouth. He was the kid who was very vocal while he was in treatment when other kids in his community, the LGBTQ community, would come in and be so afraid of the possibility of being ostracized or beat up. Or he was the kid who would say, come on, and I did it. And he had done it many times. He relapsed many times over 5 years. So what you're talking about in politics, so we can get into it more later, is what's happening with the victimization of the gay community. You may have an opinion on transgender in sports and surgeries as a child if a child doesn't identify with their skin. That's a whole other argument. But the idea that the marginalization of the gay community is something that, because my son was very vocal on it, that's also why I'm here today. And I hope we can talk about that a bit. But politics is, I think it's important that we do keep it on politics a bit, because the whole idea is when these kids are young and they feel different, is to just normalize them. Where if there's a gay kid in the classroom, it's as it's the same as having a blonde kid or a brunette kid, you know. And this, I find this administration, I find this administration is just sort of pouncing on the LGBTQ community unfairly.
All right, well, I was going to get to this, but let's get into it now, Rich. As Rich shared, his son Nick, who I had the pleasure of knowing and meeting, was an incredible bright light and very tragically lost his life to an accidental overdose. And I've always been in awe of you and Karen for just being able to even get out of bed in the morning, much less do this work in his honor. So I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about what inspired Nick to try and find resources for kids who didn't otherwise have any sort of a lifeline, and how you have used music. Rich puts on various events over the course of the year using music to raise funds. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the foundation, how that came to be, and I just, how you found the strength to do it.
Well, I'm grateful that you're so supportive of our organization. So to make a long story short, yes, like I said, Nick was an advocate and was about to, he was 20 in 2021, and he was 6 months sober, and he hadn't been sober for more than 2 weeks for 5 years, and my wife and I had been chasing him around the country, either getting him off the street or getting him into treatment, or from treatment to a step-down situation, step-down sober living situation. But unfortunately, July 2nd, he had a compromised 24 hours and decided to go back to the street and copped. And unfortunately, it was a baggie that was with fentanyl. But just prior to that, he was about to go back to school and get his social worker's license to become an advocate for the LGBT community. In intake, he would be the person at treatment centers who would specialize in the gay community and those entering treatment for a 30-day program. He could not have been more proud. He died, and 2 of the treatment centers came to us and said, we knew Nick to be a force. We'd like to start a foundation in his name. And me being a musician and having a lot of friends, some famous, every year now in January we do an annual concert, usually based on uplifting music, but then some dark themes also. And I'm proud to say that in Nick's name, we've developed scholarships for over 20 young adults out at Karen Treatment Center in Pennsylvania through Karen Treatment, and also through Release Recovery Foundation, who also is an equal partner. So his name lives on in this wonderful effort. And I'm told that not one of the clients has relapsed. They've all either gone back to their lives after the 30-day program, or they've gone to a step-down program. Yeah, his name lives on. You know, we're all proud of our kids. If you have children, this is my way of being proud of our son. And I think that our last conversation when he was sober, being about wanting to go back to school and become a social worker for this reason, I think there was a reason for that conversation, because my wife and I then moved on to create this virtuous foundation. I also want to add that I got into my son's phone after he died, of course, and I saw the whole pathology of his spiral. And of course, I was seeing a sober coach / therapist on how to navigate through what he was going through. And I compared all the notes, and being a songwriter, I was able to create 10 songs that kind of parallels our lives. And this CD, which is called Hold Still Light Escapes, it's everywhere, not only CD, but it's streaming. But the CD, all proceeds go to the foundation. So if you can jot down richpagano.com and sample it on the website, if you dig it, that's a great way if you'd like to support the foundation.
That's great, thanks. So the music's really good too. Sarita, you have an amazing career as a musician, as an advocate. I mean, the trumpet, come on. I mean, look at that thing. So she's walking her own path while also paving the way for a lot of young female musicians. I know this is a space where you've done a lot of work. So I'm curious if you can share how you knew that you had to lead the way for others while walking that path yourself, and how you managed to do it all at the same time.
Well, you know, when something is your passion, you walk in it. So this is my passion. I live, eat, and breathe music. I was reared and trained in this. And so my path, when I see young ladies and young girls, because I never fitted in. I wasn't good at English in school. I didn't play basketball, sports. So music became my life. And so I was in probably every kind of band: symphonic band, concert band, jazz band, brass ensemble, wind ensemble. I've never been to any type of a dance club where people dance, you know, number one, because I use my ears for a living. Number two, is dark. Number three, I'm not gonna walk in heels in this dark. So, you know, so I found that music was my passion. So my give back is for young girls and young people to understand education, and that music is a platform that you can have a successful career. And that goes from studying your path, knowing your craftsmanship, studying music in its entirety, from the craftsmanship stage, but also too from people building stage. Because a lot of times what I've learned in being a trumpet player is that most of us wind players, we kind of have to go through band and things of those nature, because it is kind of an odd space. You don't see a lot of girls playing a tuba or a French horn or something like that. So it took me a while to kind of make what I do and find my path, because I was different. In high school, I would go to the Chicago Art Institute and sit in with the jazz ensemble that played there. I would be the one that would be trying to figure out, like, if we all could be quiet and hear the sound, then trying to figure out how many 16th notes that is. So I had to realize and live in my path. So within that path, I started realizing that there are other young ladies that's in a different type of a path. So how can I give them an opportunity? Well, guess what? You can give them an opportunity, number one, by sharing your story, being there for them, and help to pave their way for where it makes sense for them. So within that, just so happened this year, the Recording Academy, the Grammy Museum, established a scholarship in my name, the Trumpet Lady Scholarship, as to where I'm going to be giving away a scholarship to a young lady that will be attending the Grammy Camp this year. And I also support a school in New Orleans, Louisiana, called St. Catherine's Drexel Prep, who they don't have musical instruments. And so I feel that, I'm sorry I get a little choked up, is that it's my due diligence that I have to make sure that these young ladies have an instrument, because I'm sitting here with you because of my instrument. And there were people that invested into me. One person that invested into me was Wynton Marsalis. And funny story, I was so excited, he gave me the raggediest trumpet case. Yeah, I mean, it was raggedy. Now, on the inside, the trumpet was dinged up, the bell was all dinged up. I mean, and for most musicians know, the raggedier the instrument, the better it plays. I was so excited, the fact that Wynton Marsalis gave me this trumpet case. I would walk around the city with this trumpet case and I would pull it out. I mean, my home was so dinged up, I had tape all over it, and it was just a mess. But the fact that he took the time to give me his trumpet case, and I appreciate that, because we're in a society where people don't even give back information. So it's my due diligence, someone that has been through the path, to give back to young girls and education, to say, listen, you can have a successful career. It being a musician, a philanthropist, a filmmaker, you can do it. So that's my job. I'm going to do it. Sometimes I don't always know the way to do it, the path to do it. But my school in New Orleans, they're going to be fully banned. I've sent about close to 15 students to Berklee College of Music on full scholarship. I've mentored, I don't get a chance to talk about it a lot, but I've got a chance to mentor a lot of students that are in that space. A lot of times they don't have parental support. I grew up in a single family home because my dad was deceased, and my mother made sure, she's right there in the back, she made sure,
You must be very proud. Shout out for Serena's mom back
you know,
there.
she made sure that I had everything that I needed. She sent me out here to the East Coast from Chicago, and it was just me. And so I make it my business to make sure that young people have what they need to succeed. If it's me going to buy a box of reeds, if it's me raising money to make sure they have an instrument, because you can't have your craft without being here.
Well, first of all, congratulations to Serena's mom. You've done a lovely job here. And I love that she said she got a little choked up talking about this. I think verklempt is the word you're looking for here.
Because, you know, when you're growing up in music, you know, a lot of times it can be intimidating because you don't have, when you're growing up in high school and in college, and I was just telling my mother writing, I said, man, I was so poor when I was at NYU, I didn't even have $10. You know, and I would sit in my room and practice all day long, and no one gave me the path. So I have to give back. It's a part of my due diligence because people took the time to invest in me. The fact that I used to sneak into jazz clubs because I didn't have money. You know, don't tell anybody that, that's our secret. But I wanted to be around the music. So, and then like Terrence Blanchard, the late great Freddie Hubbard, they would see me standing at the side door, knowing I hadn't eaten all day, but I stood at the side door with my horn on my back, and then what I would do, I would go to the green room and all those places to sneak food in because I didn't have it, but I wanted to be around the music. So the fact that they took out the time to let me be around them all day long, I would sit at Lincoln Center from 10 a.m. to 6 o'clock at night.
That's how you do it.
I would sit there.
That's how you do it. So, Taylor, so
Yes, Judy.
you've been a massive pop star, very active in service to the Recording Academy as a chapter president, as a trustee. But meanwhile, the more I learn about you, the more I see what you've done for your community in Tulsa and for the global community. So I'm curious, at what point did you come to realize that that was part of your portfolio, and how do you manage to do it all?
First of all, I don't know where to begin because I'm thinking, where does it actually begin? I think it goes back to what you're saying about music. Music, really early on when you decide to make music, pretty much everybody tells you, don't do it, right? They're like, do you have another option, you know? And that's the first leap, I think. I think it's absolutely the opposite thing that you should be doing. You do not leave yourself options. And I think the reason I say that is I think that risk, that leap, is I think what's required to engage in any cause. And you know, I was thinking about social change, and I kind of go, when I think of what we're doing, it's really not just social change, because change isn't necessarily good. It's human service. It's service, really. It's response. And so I think probably the first one that was really active was advocating for music in schools. One of the early Save Music campaign, the VH1 champion, when I was still 14 or 15, and we had a breakout hit already, and we're sitting there talking to kids in school that have maybe not had any access to musical instruments, and to have that platform where you realize that, again, like you said, if you didn't have that channel, where would you be? Where would the stories have gone? Where would that, would you have gotten angry? Would you have turned to an addiction? But one of the stories I think of, so if anybody wants to look at anything I'm working on, one of the things I'm really, really passionate about is food insecurity and what's going on with food deserts and lack of access to food. Go check out Food on the Move, bouquet.com. We're doing some amazing things. But I'm going to pivot back to music as a reason for social change and the pairing. We, in 2006, really became connected to and sort of moved to engage in what was happening around the world in sub-Saharan Africa, movement for, and it started with being in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm from, and realizing the HIV/AIDS statistics there were one of the highest in the whole country, and I thought, this doesn't even make sense. This doesn't add up. And it took me down the path of trying to understand that issue, and it led us to Africa. Led us to these statistics where kids are born with a disease that they never have a vote. Right? They're born with this disease, and you have all these options to give people medicine that is, a mother can take an antiretroviral drug for 30 cents a day, but there's such a stigma to take it because they don't want to admit that they have this disease. And so you have this whole generation, right? So this is 2006. And so we started a campaign to try and just talk about doing small things. That 33-cent drug, what that could do to save a life. Imagine that, to be a young mother and know you're going to transmit this disease. So a year after we started this campaign called Take the Walk, we were in Africa. We went to South Africa specifically to work with Tom's Shoes. Does you guys know what Tom's Shoes is? Now, okay, this is when they've sold hundreds, thousands of shoes, now millions probably, but they'd only sold 5,000 shoes, so I met Blake because we wanted to try and help raise money to get shoes from people in communities, tangible things, buy medicine, help Joe well, help buy. And we were on this trip, man, this is a long setup, sorry. And I remember that was the first time I thought, music, what am I doing? Music, why does this even matter? We visited an orphanage of kids that had all lost their parents to HIV, and they had a 5-year life expectancy, okay? And we're there giving out Tom's Shoes, right? And you buy a pair of shoes, you get a pair of shoes. We'd helped them move from 5,000 to 50,000 on a tour that year. So Blake was there, he said, will you please come to Africa? We're gonna deliver these shoes, they call them shoe drops. And on this trip, I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, I make songs. Like, this is so meaningless. I mean, that's the only time I've ever really, truly thought that. But within 48 hours, I was like thrown to the ground with like, okay, you idiot. And this is what it did it. We were visiting this orphanage of these kids that were all, like I said, expected to live 5 years. And two things happened. One, the dignity of humanity just burst forward. You got all these shoes, you're thinking about giving people something. And you think, hey, you shouldn't be happy with anything, right? You don't have any shoes. But every one of those kids, they went through that pile of shoes and looked, I want the red ones, I want the blue ones, I want the green ones. And you think that doesn't go away. And the other thing that happened is, in this 48-hour period where I was just going, man, I just need to quit my job and I need to stop making music. These people are struggling, they're dying, extreme poverty. And we were finishing meeting with these folks and somebody started playing music. And every kid in that building stood up and began to dance. And you watched the joy just erupt. And I almost lost it in that moment. Before I knew it, we're sitting with these, group of 25 kids and their caretakers, all of which are expected to not live to their next birthday. And I'm like, this matters. Because the joy and the humanity and the connection is what might give just a little bit of hope to move to the next day and the next day and the next day. And so I have personally seen that over and over, how you can do good work and man, get out there and do the work. Get out there and be passionate about the cause. Serve the mission that you have in your heart. But music over and over is able to be there with us and help. I think in the end, it connects us to our humanity. It says you're not alone. Other people are walking through this too. And it's not about what cause. It's about seeing that there's all these people and we all love this thing that reminds us we're human. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I'm trying to figure out how to follow that. Now it's interesting you talk about what it was like for young children, and it just immediately brought me to mind one of the things that you'll learn if you unfortunately have to spend some time in an intensive care unit is that the nurses will tell you that at the end of life, the sense of hearing is the last thing to go. And when my mother was towards the end of her life, and she had lived a long time, but obviously as anyone who's lost an older parent, just because they're old doesn't mean it's not excruciating. And my mother had cancer and she had been deteriorating and she was in the hospital up in Inwood and for about a week had been pretty much unconscious, semi-conscious, barely responsive. And I kept thinking about what I'd been told about the power of hearing and the power of music. So I thought, okay, I'm going to bring in the heavy hitters. So I brought in my laptop and I started cranking the greatest hits of Frank Sinatra. So all of a sudden, my mother, who pretty much hadn't opened her eyes in about a week, sits up. She starts shimmying in her bed, for real. And the doctors and the therapists are walking in like, what is happening here? And unfortunately, she didn't last much longer, but I'm a witness, and I always say that was the last good day. That was the last good day. That is what the power of music can do. And I think about the stories that you've all shared, whether it's what you're doing with the women that you're inspiring or the people that Nick's Memory and Foundation continue to serve, or the stories that you tell. I'm a big believer in the ripple effect, right? And you think about how when somebody's an organ donor and their life goes on and all these other lives, all the stories that we're hearing today are putting out countless, infinite numbers of ripples, because everybody that goes through Nick's program and survives because of that scholarship will go on to impact countless lives, and the lives that you've impacted, and hopefully some of those kids outplayed their life expectancy. So music really is, forgive the pun, instrumental in making all of that happen. So we talked earlier about the times in which we find ourselves. As Larry mentioned, when I was coming out here, when President Biden was in office, he signed something called the Peace Through Music Diplomacy Act. There really is a law on the books, the Peace Through Music Diplomacy Act, and out of that, it created a partnership between the State Department and the Recording Academy. So I was lucky enough to be brought in as one of the lead instructors, and all of a sudden you have people from Ghana, from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Egypt, from Morocco. My fellow lead instructor, Gina Chavez from the Texas chapter, is playing guitar and singing in Spanish. I'm playing percussion. You hear 4 or 5 different African dialects. There's a woman from Kenya who's playing a string instrument that is typically only allowed to be played by men, and here's music that is making this happen. So there's so many different barriers between people these days, whether they're national or political or color or gender. There's so many different ways that we're divided, and music, I'm certainly not the first one to talk about being an universal language to bring us together. So I'm curious to these amazing panelists if you have particular strategies that you think can be used, particularly during these challenging times, to try and manifest what we're talking about and reach people through music and try and have an impact, whether on the causes that you're already working on or anything else.
I was just thinking of something very simple, and I'll keep it short. So I mentioned food insecurity. So Food on the Move is an organization that started 10 years ago in Oklahoma, and I didn't know anything about food, but we listened to everybody working in the food space and kind of heard this term, food deserts, which really goes back to lack of grocery stores. Food insecurity is breaking down the food system. The good stuff should be more affordable. The point about go-to as far as strategy is, music, we talk about music as it is universal language. If you've toured, if you've traveled the world, you've seen it. But you actually have to put that into action. And so one of the things we found was all these amazing, the soup kitchen and the nonprofit, the health department. And when you go to their events, they're a little bit depressing. It's like, oh, guys, come on. And nobody means that to be the case. They're just there to serve. And so one of the things we've done from the very, very beginning is we do these pop-up events within food deserts where we basically bring everybody that could possibly provide food, from a food truck to fresh produce, which is the main goal. And we'd like to say you hear us before you see us, because that music, there's a DJ there and they're doing line dancing, and they're using that communication that says, it's good over here. This is where we need to, you make people feel welcome by them setting those tones, like a good smell coming from a restaurant around the corner. And so to realize, to not do what I started to do in my Africa story, and go, oh, music, it's not, but to realize it's the first thing you get to say about how you feel in this environment, I think. And so just to remember to go, how can I use this, whatever cause comes to mind, whether it's political, whether it's social action, go, music has a role. How do we put it in the center of the conversation?
And one strategy that I use, and I know it's a strategy because it's just a part of my DNA, I actually go to the schools. If I'm out on tour somewhere, I make that a part of my schedule. If I'm in Chicago and LA, I go to the school that has a program, and I sit and observe. And I talk to the students, and as I'm talking, I get a gauge to see where there's a need, if there's a need. And I also talk to the faculty to see, and the administrator to see where there's a need, and then if there's a need, where's the need, and how can I help fix the need? Then I come back and I do my own research on the school and the individuals, and then I do an assessment from there, and I go back and try to help meet that need.
Yes. I think for me, for the foundation, I think that all of us, whether you're young or older, having a level of service in your life is really a big part of why we're here. And it could be anything, just giving a percentage of your life to helping others that are not as fortunate as you. I realize now as I get older, it's really all about service. When you're on your deathbed, you'll think about that as much as your family, that you've helped humanity. But I think the strategy of algorithms is so important. It's a drag that you have to spend so much time picking and choosing certain words when you put a post up. But I find that posting about the events coming up and the success of the foundation, like I said, picking and choosing. There are certain words that somehow get you to the top of the scroll. Being a studio owner, being able to create content prior to an event, whether it be 30-second snippets that we all see on Instagram and TikTok, it really is key to sort of saturating the community. And I don't feel like I'm being a pain in the neck at all because for the reason that we're doing it. But I think understanding social media and knowing how to utilize it and get past the algorithms is super important to getting your word out.
Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time. I guess two parting thoughts. Picking up on what these amazing people have said. Who here has ever had a bad day? I find when you're having a bad day, what can make you feel the best, other than chocolate, obviously, is try and do something for somebody else. And when you're caught in your own head, being of service, specifically through music, but just trying to do something good for somebody else will make your day better, but also don't forget the chocolate. Music as a force for good can come through in many, many different ways, but it's most impactful when it comes from the heart. So please help me thank these wonderful, heartfelt people.